So hi everybody, Steve Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. We are continuing our discussion on happiness. And just before I started the recording, the subject came up about something we started talking about last week, which is about phrenology. And so, Brian, I'll throw it back to you so you can kind of make your observation, and then I'll add my little piece to it. So go right ahead.
I was making an observation that I think your cheat sheet, I think is what you call it, where
Quick reference guide.
the response states and
Sure.
the physical cues, the emotional cues, the mental cues, like if someone is upgrade or versus someone downgrade. Because when we're talking about all of these emotions, what I keep going back to, like in phrenology, I know they say like happiness is midbrain, those kinds of things, but that's really the culmination of systems gathering
Yes.
together. So we can't
Yes.
necessarily just pinpoint it there,
Mm-hmm.
because think about, like, there's a physical aspect to the emotion, right? So that's the somatic nervous system, which is part of the peripheral nervous system. And there's the thought that goes with whatever happiness is. There's some kind of image that comes to it. So now you're talking about peripheral nervous system, central nervous system. So all of these are converging information that forms that happiness experience.
Right. And so that would then, I'm trying to think about how we were never able to overlay the phrenology diagram itself on the change
Right,
grid.
right.
Oh, because I don't think that was ever kind of due. Kathy, I'm going to email it over to you. But in the phrenology book, and I'm looking up to see how handy it is. Now I'd have to get a ladder out to get to it. But there is a chart that talks about different personality aspects that end up being revealed in the overall shape of someone's head. And so they end up, if you had a square head, a round head, an oval shaped head, whatever, the different head things where you might be described as having a magnetic element, not magnetic like we would describe today, saying you're very attractive. No, that's not what it was all about. It was like magnetism was part of what you're going, contributing to your makeup. And so I'll pull that out and show it to you next time, because that did overlay quite nicely with it. So yeah. Now keep in mind that even when phrenology was in its heyday, it was still just considered to be a pseudoscience. There were a lot of people that were kind of making up stuff as they went along just to make their performance a little bit more engaging. The thing that did stay consistent was the phrenology heads map. And it was kind of validated overall, but why it really fell by the wayside was because the more behavioral type of psychology was coming into its own. And so psychiatry as a field of medicine was in its infancy. Because remember, this is like the mid to late 1800s, and that's, you had all that kind of stuff going on too. So there was never a period of time where phrenology was considered to be complete, absolutely accurate. There were always people that were critics of it. I found it intriguing. Because I've always found that anyone who goes through that amount of trouble to document something that thoroughly, there's got to be something inside of it that is worthwhile. So I don't like throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Oh, bonus question. Who knows where that phrase came from? But I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Because the baby was always the last to be bathed.
Exactly right. That once a week bath. And I never understood why the filthiest person got to bathe first, but no one understood hygiene back then, did they? Yeah. All right, let me go ahead and send this to Kathy. Did anyone else have trouble downloading the infographic? Okay.
No.
All right, if you did, well, there you go. But I'm going to send it over to Kathy. I cannot click and talk at the same time. Someone explain to me what's going on.
Thank you. I have the same problem, T. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the ability to It's both sides of the brain are trying to be used at once, and I have enough trouble using my sides one at a time. So,
I
all right,
just want to comment on phrenology for just a minute.
sure.
The uh, I mean, only because the early anthropologists did a lot of work in the late 1800s or early 1900s on phrenology,
Hmm.
and it was used, unfortunately. If you read Gods of the Upper Air, you'll still read some of
Yep,
this. But it was used, unfortunately, as a basis for racist theory about
absolutely.
shape
Hmm.
of head and,
Hmm.
black versus white versus Asian versus Indian,
Yep, yep. And they used it for a lot of what do I want to say? Things that today would be considered to be totally inaccurate, inappropriate, all the other words you want to attach to it. But you're right, way back then, I think it really was a tool that ended up being distorted for use to justify people's biases.
Mhm.
And from there, because one thing I mentioned last time around is that phrenology is really all about taking very precise measurements of what's happening on someone's skull. And they would tell you that if certain ratios were, if the ratios of certain metrics were within certain ranges, they could tell you whether you were a noble character, whether you were an evil person, you had an evil brain, you had a noble brain. They would do all these kinds of things. And one of the studies that supposedly they did, I wasn't there, I wouldn't know, was they went into the prison population and wanted to do all these measurements of the people who had committed the most heinous of crimes just to see if there were some patterns in the shapes of their skulls. And obviously, they were able to prove their points, no doubt by eliminating all data that went against the point they were trying to make. But nevertheless, that's what they were very much attempting to do. So, you know, life has always been about power. And
Mhm.
so any tool that someone can use to seize power, to maintain power, you can always kind of expect that to come into play at some point in time. So why, someone had to fund the phrenologists. Why do I
Yeah,
expect they were trying to, justify something? Yeah, yeah,
yeah, that's true.
yeah. So, well, the history of man's inhumanity to man. There
Yeah,
you are.
that's what keeps us in trouble.
Well, exactly right.
Unfortunately,
Yeah,
this disregard for humanity. You know, when people are talking about the war with Ukraine. We're always at war. I
yeah,
mean, we're
yeah.
at war against ourselves, and that's what leads to these kinds of wars. But
Right. And
manufactured pandemic and all these different kinds of things, they're all social ills that are derived from man.
yeah, absolutely. And certainly, we talked about this at the very first thing we ever talked about in the Circle of Brilliance calls back when COVID was first starting, was we talked about the power that the media has
Mhm.
to greatly sway the mindset of the public. And so you have to be very selective. Remember, we did a whole series about different sources of news and the difference between people who report news, people who make news, people comment on news. These are all very different things that people do. And one of the things we looked at was a study that had been done by, I don't know which institute, I forget, but it would talk about whether a particular media outlet was leaning one way, leaning the other way. And it would even talk about fact checking sites. Were they leaning one way or another way? So you look at all of it and just kind of realize that we are probably today more the result of aggressive manipulation by others than perhaps any other generation.
Mhm.
Because we really are being bombarded at all times from all angles with messages that 100 years ago never would have reached us.
Right.
So, right, so we have to realize that um, we are very much pulled into this whole drama as pawns and players and all that. It's tragic, but we shall survive. Look at what we've already survived historically. So
Right.
Not that we should, but nevertheless. Okay. Well, isn't it funny that I just kind of said what I just said as the subject of today is happiness? Oh, bloom where you're planted, people. So, all right, so this particular infographic we started last week, and I had not known that it was some several feet long, but we kind of started talking our way through this and discussed and debated whether or not we agree with all the things that it says, what it might be missing, what its own biases happen to be. So one of the biases that I pointed out was that it said that you can get even more happiness out of a good experience by savoring it. And one of the things that they said was that you'll be happier if you share it with somebody else. Well, I would just say that that may very well be true for certain people, but there are other people who are perfectly happy having their own little quiet experience of the world around them. And so there are elements of bias, I think, inside of this. So, and that's okay. From their viewpoint, the science of happiness, the Happify Daily Report. These are the things that they believe could be very useful in helping people. I do believe that if someone is more of a social type and they are not sharing things with other people, they're probably not as happy. But what I think is driving at least this one tiny little part of the infographic is that it's got to be people who like people, and not everybody has that personality or has that leaning. Thoughts about that before we pick up where we left off?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think
Yeah.
that there is some bias in there about, I think there is a cultural bias in the US about extroversion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Even though half the population is introverted, but there's still their cultural bias toward extroversion, and the more extrovert what you're thinking and feeling, it's considered a better thing
Yep.
generally.
Yep. Meanwhile, there's all these quiet minds
Has
that are.
someone done a study on that, Kathy, in regards to introverts, extroverts, or to the population?
I'm giving it again. I'm sure somebody has. I'm sure
Oh
the
yeah.
people who do the Myers. I mean, if you think about Myers-Briggs analysis and
Right.
introvert, extrovert, and all of that, and there are, I've done a lot of coaching with introverts, and there's a whole different way you
Yeah.
approach it and all of that. But whether it's half and half, I mean, I don't know if that's true or not. I shouldn't have said that, but
No,
it's
no,
but
it's
it's
No,
a
I'm just asking because I'm seeing a lot of that. Like, there's a lot of books that are coming out about the power of introverts, the power of being a generalist, and those kinds of things. So I'm just
yes.
like some
Yes,
research there. That's
yes. No, I mean, when you think about, how, I mean, it used to be that, well, anyway,
yeah.
there
Let
are
me
more
throw.
successful introverts now because of technology. And,
Sure.
and
yeah,
so
yeah.
you've got, a lot more, thank you, T. You've got a lot more billionaires who are introverted versus
Absolutely.
extroverted than there used to be.
Right. Particularly the more technological something is, I mean, it's a puzzle. You got
Yeah,
to be able to get lost in your own mind to be able to get into the puzzle. So now this came January 26th,
yeah.
22, so
Oh,
not that so
okay.
old. This is from positivepsychology.com. I have no reason to question what they're doing, but they said the first official random sample by the Myers-Briggs organization showed introverts made up 50.7% and extroverts 49.3 of the US general population.
Okay, so I was right to throw
There
it
you go.
out.
50-50 is
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it says down here, now this goes to 2010. I don't know about Quora. I never know who's contributing this, but studies show that 30% of the world's population is introverted, but the MBTI shows they're a little bit over 50%. So obviously there is some debate. And I wonder if it goes back to how we go about defining introversion versus extroversion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Certainly, all the people I know who are Myers-Briggs fluent would tell you that introversion and extroversion don't have anything to do with whether or not you're the life of the party or not. It has to do with how you get your batteries recharged. So do you find being around other people to be invigorating and energizing? If you do, you would fall into the extroverted category. And if you find being in groups of people to be draining and you recharge battery by going into yourself and, caving for a little while, being really quiet and all that, then you're more of an introvert. And that's pretty much how they put it, as opposed to how it's expressed. It's more about how you're experiencing it.
And the other key aspect of that, which I think has to do with what we're talking about with our happiness thing, is that people who are, I mean, I'm slightly extroverted on Myers-Briggs. I'm not fully, but I tend to get my energy, you're talking about energy from others, but I can be more creative in conversations with a group than I can being on my own. And that's the difference between introverts kind of create their own stuff and tie it up with a bow before they express it, whereas extroverts are always speaking in process.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Very much. Yep. Very good.
Exactly.
Okay, anyway, so point is, as we go through this, I find this really quite fascinating, but I think that there are going to be some biases, so don't hesitate to point them out if you discover one. So savoring experiences makes us happier, more grateful, and more hopeful, while reducing levels of stress, guilt, and depression. Boy, there's a lot crammed into that one sentence. They strengthen the parts of the brain connected with happiness. So we go back to what we said last time around. I said, Brian, what parts of the brain are connected with happiness? Please point me to my happiness button. So, and, he helped us all to be reminded or understand that there are many elements that are involved in happiness and processing the experience that leads us to that. And it pulls into play different areas of the brain and different neurochemicals along the way. So so there's not a happy part of my brain?
No, not even memory. Like you open the brain up and you say, oh yeah, memory, this is the memory bank. You'd be hard pressed to find it.
Right. Yeah. And so that's why I've always thought, like, is happiness more of a, well, first of all, it's an abstract experience. I don't believe that any two people experience happiness in the same identical way. So what I mean by I'm happy and what you mean when you say you're happy may not be the same thing at all. But for whatever reason, we used to talk about abstract experiences as being things that all humans experience, unless there's something else going on. But generally speaking, all humans experience, but there's no way of knowing whether their experiences are identical. So if I said I'm confident, am I describing the same thing you would be experiencing that you would label as confident? We all have our own experiences of these things. That's why they're abstract.
Right.
Okay, so savoring experiences makes us happier, more grateful, and more hopeful. One other thing we said last time around, and Kathy, I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts about this, is that in order for me to do these things, they're saying savoring it. So using all of my senses, paying attention to sight, sound, smells, paying attention to little details, lingering, even doing this assessment down here in the yellow box. In order for those things to happen, I actually have to pull myself out of the moment of experience. I have to dissociate myself in order to check in. Am I using all of my senses? I have to pull myself out of the experience, dissociate in order to go, am I paying attention to little details? So I've always kind of wondered when I said this, is it better to just be in the experience than it is to be processing it while you're in it?
See, I think that the former, because when you're processing it, you're moving out of the experience into your head. And therefore, being in the experience is being in the present. So you're letting go of your thought process, which is always more satisfying. And it's not if you're in pain, but it's more satisfying to be in that present, in that experience, than it is to step back And I would argue that, you know, being in the center or being in the PowerPoint, I mean, there's a detachment there, but engaging in the experience is really where you're going to get the joy
Right.
of the experience itself, in that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Remember that the center of the change grid is a place of physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, if you will, detachment from what's actually going on. But in order for us to have something to process when we're there, unless we're just so good at it, we just go there and just experience the nothingness of fullness. Someone write that down. I'm sure we could turn it into a t-shirt. But to really just kind of be, we have to have had an experience of some sort. And so I go to this, I go like, well, how I would handle it is after an experience is over, if I wanted to turn that experience into a bit more of a growth experience overall, I might say, well, let's take a look at what I experienced, what I did. Was I using all of my senses, or was I focusing on only one sense? Maybe next time around, I'll also listen a little bit more, or I'll pay attention to whatever it is. Or when it comes to the little details, I could ask myself, was I really looking at more superficial kinds of things? Was I down in the details? Was I so far down in the details that I didn't see the bigger experience? Or was I so pulled into the big experience that I didn't notice these little subtle details? And so I could kind of see using this as an after the fact way of assessing, as a way of kind of growing. What are your guys' thoughts about that?
Yeah, I like what Kathy just described and what you just talked about. I happened to come across a research article that's titled Maximizing versus, and I think I'm pronouncing this word correctly, satisficing.
Satisficing? Interesting. Okay.
And it says happiness is a matter of choice. So what Kathy was describing is the difference between what they're talking about in terms of how we chase happiness, like maximizing it, instead of cultivating satisfaction in the moment, right? So that's what they're calling satisficing. I never seen that word before.
People make words up. Welcome to English.
Struggling with it. But I'll send you the article because on my other computer. But they talk about in any given moment, we're not privy to all the information that we have to experience the full of that particular moment.
Yeah.
And so that's why satisficing, as they're describing it, becomes more important than trying to maximizing.
Yeah, I'd like to see more about that. It is an interesting concept. But again, sometimes I wonder how practical some of the things are that you'll read about or you'll learn about in the moment. I can see a lot of these things as being tools of reflection. But like, for example, let's say that you're in a situation where you're very upset about something. If you had the ability to move to the center of the change grid momentarily, that movement to the center of the change grid might enable you to realize that simply by changing the frame around which you are encapsulating this experience, the experience will change. And so you're in the center, you go like, oh, that's a great reminder. Okay, I'm going to go back into the experience now and do something around it. Obviously, that would take a very high degree of self-awareness and really good command of coping skills or self-coaching kinds of skills. But
yeah.
But so I think, obviously, okay, I love the center of the change grid. I think that there's a great deal of opportunity and a great deal of benefit in helping ourselves and others to better understand the center of the change grid, to be able to get to the center, to expand our understanding and our skill set inside of the center of the change grid. And while I'm saying all that and celebrating all that, I also believe that that is not where life is lived. So, life is about being between the green circle and the red circle. I could switch the diagram right now, but you guys all know what I mean when I say the green circle and the red circle. That's where life is lived. So there's outgrid stuff that's going on. There's downgrid stuff and upgrid stuff and ingrid stuff and stuff all in blends of all those possibilities. That's living life. And sometimes as we try to live life, we encounter a situation where we need to just pull back for a moment, dissociate ourselves so that we can see things a bit more clearly and make some better choices. But then we got to get back into living. So,
Right,
yeah,
right,
Kathy, what's your thoughts
Yeah,
about that?
no, I agree. I think that is, it's engagement that is
Mhm.
mhm,
what life is generally all about. And, so yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to live totally in the center all the time. It's almost humanly impossible to
Yeah,
begin.
mhm.
right.
Um,
It's not life.
It's not life. Yeah,
It's not
yeah. And
life.
it's a very powerful place to be, and
Yeah,
it
yeah,
does allow you to build your, your spiritual
yeah.
vibration, if you want to put it that way. But engagement is, in that area where you're near the, I can't remember, the green ring, I guess, is really where you're living life.
Yeah, yeah, between the green and the red. Let me just slide this out of the way and see if I can.
I tend to think of it the same way I think about the gym, right? So you need resistance to build, right?
Right,
So
yeah,
you can't build muscle stamina or strength training without that resistance. And life offers that resistance, but what people tend to do is make that a negative thing instead of just understanding that you have something that brought you this far, right? You can get grounded by going back to the center, and then you go back out and you come out even stronger, but you
right.
need the resistance.
That's right. That's absolutely right. One of the ways that it was explained to me when I first got involved with weightlifting, and that was that um, weightlifting is really about getting a message to be sent to your brain. And
Hmm.
that message is we need more strength down here, or we need more size down here. We need more whatever down here. We need more speed. We need more agility. We need more flexibility. Until that message is sent and received by the brain is kind of left going like, well, we survived that one. Okay. So we're good to go. So it doesn't want to put on additional mass or anything like that for no reason. The body tries to be as efficient as it can. So yeah, so you got to have that thing set. So let me just kind of remind everyone about the little circles. When we're talking about the exact center of the change grid, that's what we're saying, that place of momentary total dissociation from the world that you're in. And again, that's if you've gone there deliberately. We pass through there accidentally all the time or incidentally all the time. But nevertheless, when you do it deliberately, you're just going like, I want to be able to practice separating myself from this life as I know it so that I can recharge my batteries, find peace, balance, center, all that kind of stuff. So that's this very, I think, deliberate pursuit of some kind of personal or spiritual kind of growth. That's what's happening there. Well, between the purple spot and the green circle, inside of here is a very happy and fulfilled life. Yeah, there's some outgrid stuff that goes on and some upgrid and ingrid and downgrid, but it all happens with a feeling of flow. It's all very manageable. It's all very, perfectly pleasant, even if there's stuff that needs to be taken care of. When you go between the green circle and the red circle, now life or others, as the case may be, we'll just say life is throwing you a little bit of a curveball. So if it's up grid, well, this is something that could be threatening to you, or it could be unpleasant. And down grid, you could be becoming a little bit complacent and ambivalent and about that. And out grid, you might be pushing a little bit too hard or whatever. So you're kind of moving yourself out of balance, because by experiencing these things between the green circle and the red circle, you're able to grow, to learn, to enhance yourself in whatever way it is. And that's going to ultimately enrich what happens inside of the green circle, because what was outside of the green could now be something that lives comfortably inside of the green because of your mellowing, whatever. Outside of the red circle are the danger zones. So too much is happening. So I think Kathy is absolutely right when we're talking about that. You really do. It really does take discipline and practice to get to the center of the change grid. But who can live there? because that's just not life. Even if it's the pleasant stuff, the harmony stuff going on inside the green circle, or if it's something that's a little bit more out of balance, a little bit more challenging. This is life being lived. Yeah. Thoughts about that before we get back to our infographic?
That's kind of that inside out approach. I don't think we're meant to stay in the center as it is. We're meant
No.
to, or at least position to create the greatest value if we operate from that perspective where we're most strong. I see it as the difference between operating out of the expanse of who I am instead of at my expense.
Ooh, say that again. Operating at the expanse of who I
Operating
am.
from the expanse of who I am instead of operating at my expense. So in other words, when you look at the statistics on stress, I think it's some 40% of people say that they go to doctors for stress-related conditions, and they believe that stress is coming from work. And so when I'm interviewing them, a lot of them are taking on more stimulus than their capacity to keep up with it. So when we ask questions like, well, what is your recovery strategy? They say, well, what the hell is that? I'm like, okay, how do you calm down from stress? They have no game plan for it.
Right, right.
So they're operating at their expense. They remind me kind of like of an athlete who's already played big game before the big game. So they have no energy,
Yeah.
mental, physical, intellectual, for the game itself. And they go burnt out, and they're doing that for 10, 20 years.
So that's operating at the expense of who they are.
Right, instead of out of the expanse. And so when they get grounded after they're seeing the psychologist and they're working on a few things that they can take ownership with, even in these stress environments, and give themselves, a timeout and to retool and refuel themselves, then they're operating out to the abundance who they are. So they can be around that stress and in that resistance, but get back to some sense of normalcy for them to where it's not chronic anymore.
Yep, yep, very good. I love that. I love that. Yeah, I think a lot of people think that if you're up in stress, the way that you get out of it is to cultivate practices that move you very far down grid. But if the way you're escaping stress is by napping, which is a very downgrade kind of a thing, are you really coping with the stress?
No, it becomes a distraction. And that's what they were saying, like, oh, I have to have my guilty pleasures. I have to watch my reality TV and all
Yeah,
these different kinds of things. And that's very temporal, but I
yeah, yeah,
question
yeah.
as to how do you benefit from that?
Yeah. Well, and it's also like the difference between, okay, and again, if you're upgrade, you're stressed out, anxious, whatever it may be, are you taking an SSRI or something like that that's bringing your neurotransmitters back into balance? So think of it more as a vitamin than as a drug. Are you taking some sort of tranquilizer,
Right.
which now you're down in apathy, but nothing has really changed. No growth has occurred. You've learned nothing. But if anything, you've learned that the way to avoid the pain is to keep yourself drugged.
Right,
In
right.
which case, you got a different set of problems that have to be dealt with. Okay, let's go back.
That
Yeah.
was a good conversation. Thanks for that.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Let's take a look back at this infographic. I still think there's several feet of it remaining if you scroll through it. Now, this I found very interesting. 3 things that will kill your happiness over time. So comparing yourself to others, all right, a lack of close friendships. Again, even though I'm more of a hermit, I need some people. And I can imagine that over time that becomes a bigger issue. Again, I live in an over 55 community, and one of the things that we know is very problematic for the aging population is isolation. And so we know that's going to take its toll. And as we observed earlier, at least half the population literally needs the energy that they get from being around other people. But then holding on to resentment, I thought it was interesting that they chose to depict alcohol and labeled it as holding on to resentment. So So, because I'm thinking like, yeah, people who are using any kind of mood altering substance, ultimately it's going to kill your happiness over time. But I thought holding on to resentment is a totally different thing that doesn't necessarily make you turn to the bottle to do that. So I thought, well, that's a very interesting choice of image there, but both of those would be true, I think.
Mhm.
So, yeah. So, okay, then it gets into embracing adversity. People who've experienced some adversity in life are happier than those who've never experienced any.
Hmm.
So, I mean, just read that statement again. People who've experienced some adversity in life are happier than those who've never experienced any. They're missing the people whose life have been absolutely filled with adversity, don't end up joyful, I wouldn't think. So I think they're just saying that adversity, if we go back to our concentric circles here, maybe adversity is one of the labels we use for experiences that would plot between the green and the red. Obviously, adversity expresses itself in many different ways and means many different things. So maybe we're saying that adversity is a learning experience. But if you find yourself in a situation where it's life or death and it's constant, a constant threat in your reality, um, I would want to know, well, then what happens at that level of extreme to one's
Mhm.
happiness equation? And who are these people who've never experienced any adversity? What was this set of qualifications in order for something to be deemed an adverse experience that anyone would be able to go like, oh, I've never had anything that falls in that category? Hmm. So, yeah, thoughts about that?
That one's
Yeah.
hard to believe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who these people are, if and I would wonder if they don't need help, because it's like, are you just in denial that you've never had any adversity? Why don't you want to recognize it after? Why can't adversity just be learning experiences, challenges that you overcame? I think that's adversity. Anyway, after adversity, once we've got some distance and perspective, making sense of our life's challenges helps us shape our identities, increase our resilience, cope better with current stressors, which is increase resilience, and become more optimistic about the future. Does it? Okay,
Hmm.
thoughts
Yeah,
about this one?
yeah, no, I think I would tend to agree with this. I mean, if you look at it from a, certainly from a life perspective,
Yeah.
as you deal with difficult situations, as long as they don't traumatize you,
Good. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
as long as you're not left with scars and traumas that you then tend to trip over, for the rest of your life. But if you
Yeah.
come out of those things as a learning experience and you feel stronger, then emotionally and physically or whatever, then you're better able to go on and accept other challenges that
Yep.
will enable you to grow and not be afraid of those challenges.
Mhm.
So it tends to, again, with sans trauma, it tends to eliminate some of the fear that people have of change, by being able to work through successfully, and they see
Yes.
themselves as successful. And that's, it's experiencing yourself doing something successfully that allows you to gain confidence and shift. So
Exactly. And
yeah,
so what might have been an upgrade experience, as
yeah,
you found your way through it, your perceived ability went up, the perceived challenge went down. And at least for a good while, you're going to be more in power where it's confident and feeling very much on top of things. So that makes total sense. I just don't know if it's really going to make me more optimistic about
I
the
think
future.
I think it allows, yeah, I think it allows you to not fear. I mean, I don't know if
Mm,
that's phrased the right way, but it lessens your fear about obstacles that you might, or that might be ahead of you.
right.
There's more of that sense of, I can do this. I mean, I'm thinking about, I mean, what's on top of mind right now, bear with me, as I live in Connecticut. We had the Yukon girls last night play and win the,
Final four.
not Final Four. They're going into the Final Four, and they have such a track record. But watching those two teams play, NC State and UConn, and play and play and that was an amazing experience to watch them. And I've seen them many times, but what an amazing experience. And it was that grit and that willingness to say, we can do this, but on both sides,
Sure.
Mhm.
Right. And that's what
and
made it a good game. They
it
both,
was a good game. Yeah.
right. Yeah, because it was out here. Yep.
And so, I
But
mean,
to Kathy's point, they had to deal with, you know, 2 overtimes, right? And
yeah,
so imagine you think you have the game won, and it's like seconds, and all of a sudden now you're in overtime.
and you've got to go stronger and harder,
Right.
tougher than, and then you go, then it happens again. And everybody was exhausted just watching it.
Yep.
Never mind them in the midst of it, and they've got to go stronger and harder. And it was to me, that's what it is. It's like the sense of, yes, I am optimistic. I am certain, or I have that sense of I have the capability to do this. And maybe that's what they mean by optimism.
Yeah, well, and I don't really have any trouble with the thing about becoming more optimistic. It's when they gave this general about the future. I could say become more optimistic about future encounters with this same adversity situation.
Yes.
That's my thought, instead of a
in general, when you're
right.
looking at climate change and nuclear war and things
Yeah,
like that.
right. Yeah, exactly. So, because that's the thing, it's kind of like I'm always concerned. We talked about positivity, and at some point we need to talk about what is the difference between positivity, positive thinking, and happiness. And I think that when we talked about toxic positivity were the people who are so optimistic about the future or whatever that they are, in effect, denying that adversity even exists.
Mm.
And so they're not preparing for it. And so it's more of a form of escaping reality. And our thought is like, look, why don't you just instead cultivate the skill set necessary to meet reality and be successful in it? So become optimistic about your ability to handle this situation better the next time you encounter it. But to become optimistic about the future in general is not necessarily a great thing to put on your list of things to do.
No.
Yeah.
Plus, you can't account for that in your now anyway, because you
Right.
can't possibly understand how you're going to respond in the future.
Right, because do you even know what you're going to encounter? All I know is that the next time I'm in a game and it's double overtime, I can look back to the success that I had managing the energy, managing whatever the activities were, even though I was bone tired, physically exhausted, mentally whacked out. Nevertheless, hey, I did it. And even the team that didn't win, I don't know anything about how the whole thing turned out, but whoever didn't win can at least walk away from it going like, I learned a great deal about what our capacity is, what our abilities were. I saw what we might have been able to do different. So I can see how they become more optimistic about future occurrences of the same situation as opposed to future in general. So,
Right. But even that, they would have to cultivate that over time. Like it can't be just in your
yeah.
you're going to have to still mitigate for the threshold, whatever that threshold is that you have. So this is that difference between a positive saying where people use affirmations and they say nice things, but then when it gets into the experience itself, it seems to escape them because they really haven't cultivated that through some kind of experience, through some kind of some kind of working that out in real time.
Yeah.
Through an
And how much of that is reflection on how they were coached, how they were trained, how their management has supported them in getting whatever it is they needed in order to be the best they could possibly be. So whichever team won, I mean, look, for them to be where they are and to have the game be as good as that game sounds like it really was, that has to mean that both teams have been very well developed And that's a reflection on who's not only their own talents. I don't want to take it away from whatever their natural talents are and the amount of dedication they've put into their sport, but they have to be well trained. They have to be well coached. They have to be
Mhm.
well supported. So yeah, thoughts about that? So Kathy, who won?
Oh, UConn.
Okay, and you're pleased with that?
Of
Apparently.
course.
Okay.
Are you kidding?
I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't even know what sport you're talking about.
Yeah,
So.
the girls basketball.
Oh, okay.
It was started here. It was started in our state. I mean, that's
Oh,
what, yeah, that's where it all started. And so this is a big deal for us. This is 14 straight Final Fours for this team.
and
Yeah.
so how much of that do you attribute to the way that they've been assembled as a team, coached?
The coach is incredible, and the coach
Oh,
is
yeah.
Gino Auriemma is astonishing. He's probably one of the top coach, you know, the almost anywhere other than my other alma mater, which is Duke, you know, Krzyzewski. But they have a tremendous coach, but it's also the selection, and it's the way he pulls the team is a team. They're team players,
Yep.
unlike other. And so there's a whole write-up on what makes them amazing, but it has to do with, you know, when he's interviewed, he talked about having to actually bring one of his top players to her breaking point
Yep.
so that she could then go back and then heal and come back stronger. And it's that kind of, you know, thing. But yeah, you can read tons about this. It's, you know, about this team and all of that. But NC State was the #1 choice, and they had every bit the grit and the power, and it was just a question of literally 2 points.
Yep.
So
And
that's
so,
all.
right. And so that's the nice thing when you've got both together, both teams learned. That's what's important, that if you don't win, you're going to learn. And certainly if you do win, you've learned. And it was just your turn to excel in that. All right, let's see. The search for meaning. To feel connected to a deeper purpose or mission in life is key for our well-being. Okay. People who report having more meaning in their lives are more likely to have stable moods and show sociable behavior. Okay. People of all ages report being happier when they have more meaning in their lives. Okay. I have no argument with that. Anybody? Okay, so different ways people find meaning: through a fulfilling career, okay, by raising kids. 85% of parents think that their children bring them the most happiness and fulfillment of any relationship. I kind of think they're biased, but that's okay. Yeah. You're kind of obligated. It's like you can't send them back. Okay, so through spirituality and religion, okay, yep. So people who tend to have some spiritual or religious tend to be happier. Besides meaning, it also gives people a built-in social network. That's true. By pursuing goals that align with their core values. Okay, I can't argue with any of that. And I think, you know, again, back to the population that I live in, for most of them, the career element is now in the past. So it's all history. And a lot of them to this day still think of themselves as being the CEO or, you know, operating as a manager. And it's kind of like, you do know you're retired, right? So that's who you were.
What's left after you're retired and done raising kids?
Yeah, it's
spirituality and religion,
right, or pursuing a goal that
goals.
Yep, that aligns with your core values, because we know a lot of people who have become so dedicated to different charities that they work with or different causes that they hold near and dear, that they're actually putting more hours into that than they were putting into their career. So they do find that they just aren't getting paid now in monetary terms. So all that, so this feels like a little bit of a life progression someone might go through, or maybe some of these could be something that happens early in life and continues throughout life. But I would say this is true. People who have meaning, who feel like their life is making a difference and they're supporting something that's making a difference. probably find themselves happier. Now, mind you, at the core of that happiness, I'm just going to throw this out. I haven't thought this through, but there must be some sort of challenge or some sort of adversity that they're helping. Like when I think about all the usually those volunteer organizations are focused on helping some sort of a population or some sort of an issue that is struggling to get the kind of care and treatment and recognition it really needs. So that feels like that resonates very much with what we're talking about, this idea about embracing adversity. Yeah, so that would match for that. But maybe, is there meaning without some sort of challenge being present? So if my ability is a 10 or an 11 and the challenge is a 1 or a 2, am I likely to find very much meaning in life down here?
Don't think
No,
so.
no,
Yeah,
I don't.
yeah. I would think it's got to be tied to a challenge of some sort for it to start becoming meaningful. Kathy, finish your thought.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it is that that positive stress,
Yeah, yeah,
that
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 motivates us.
that we talk about all the time, that positive stress that keeps us engaged, that keeps us going, that energizes, that allows us to wake up every morning and say, okay, I've got something to do today that's important to me. And it's not, I mean, if it were easy, you know,
Yeah,
every day, that's when people slip, because there isn't that balance of stress.
right. And again, we go back to how we describe people that are further and further down grid. This is untapped potential, translates
Mm.
into unrealized dreams, unmet missions, unfulfilled whatevers. So you got to get back in the game. These people are no longer in the game. Now, mind you, they could be very comfortable, but how many people, when they retire, actually just end up downgrid? And the bad part is that downgrid, what's also waiting for you is depression and gluttony and all the things that come along with no longer paying much attention to what's really going on.
It really
So,
scares me to be down there,
yeah.
as I move into this so-called, as Carl Jung would say, the afternoon of my life at 52.
Hmm.
I just can't imagine that. It just seems like I have so much that I want to solve,
Well,
so much
good,
to
because
explore.
as someone who is 52 and a few, that I can certainly tell you that the more vital and vibrant you are now, and the more you continue that, it can only do good things for you later in life. I mean, people that end up this far downgrid are certainly more likely to have physical issues arise, even if it's just a bunch of aches and pains and things like that, because they're not moving as much as they were moving. So,
But
so
look at the
yeah.
retirement myth that's being sold to people that, that once worked. I don't know if it exists in today's time where you work for an organization for 40 years and retire with your gold watch and pension.
Yeah.
But they're sold on this lifestyle, you know, after. So like this delayed lifestyle.
Yep. Yep,
Um,
yep, yep. I
and
did
it's
what I needed to do, and now I can do what I want to do.
right, doesn't seem happy to me because they're not happy now. So I'm like, how are you going to be happy and you're sick? Again, that to me is the
Right.
difference between lifespan and health span. So we can live longer, but people
Yeah.
aren't living healthier.
Right. In which case, um, is there really a net gain in anything other than lifespan? Yeah, interesting. Okay, a few more minutes before we're done. So let's just see what they have coming up next. Making time for friends. What's this about number of hours? On days when people spend 6 to 7 hours with friends or family, just reading that statement exhausted me, I have to tell you. So they're 12 times more likely to report feeling happy rather than stressed. People who work full time experience the most happiness on days when they spend 8 to 9 hours with friends and family. So make the most of those weekends.
I have a really hard time with those numbers.
I do too.
As do I.
Yeah, it's like, Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, wow, that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, maybe that's true for some people, but that's not true. Certainly not true for me, and it's not true for I think a lot of
Yeah,
people.
and I think too, if I said, okay, spending 6 or 7 or even 8 or 9 hours a day with Linda, well, that makes me happy. But like, so maybe if it's your primary relationship, I don't even know if they're counting that in this. It says family, but you know,
Mm-mm.
but when I think about, they want me to go out there and be socially active with
For
family and
me, as an
friends.
introvert and growing up in a large family with 6 sisters, 3 brothers,
Oh
my
my.
time, I wanted to escape. Everyone has everything to say. There was always noise, and I'm just really too sensitive for all of that.
Right, right. And so, all right, like tonight, we have our card group coming over, and we play cards for, well, maybe 2.5, 3 hours, and we do that every other week. I must tell you, that's plenty. So I'm fine with that. But I do go to the gym almost every day, and so I'm spending some time with my trainer. And there's those kinds of incidental sorts of things, but it certainly doesn't add up to this number of hours it's talking about. So it's like, if I was that busy making time for friends, when am I getting other stuff done? So ah,
Mhm.
there you go. But of course, I'm a curmudgeon, so you have to kind of factor that in. All right, so that's the top of our hour for today. So coming up on Thursday, I am finding this an interesting structure to kind of walk through when it comes to happiness. So there's just these 3 little sections left to it. But when we're done with that, maybe we can take a look at some of those other models of happiness that people have sent over to us. Obviously, it's a very, very popular subject out there in the world of human growth and development. So lots has been written about it. So there we go. Okay, so with that, any final comments, thoughts you'd like to share?
Good.
No, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right, so we'll be back on Thursday. So thanks, everybody. Bye for now.
Here, everybody.
Bye bye.